Juliet was going to lead off and give a little introduction
so
from our perspective, if that's helpful.
Represent environmental conservation interests, as you know, and we look at the 2026 POCD as a really good opportunity to sort of refocus on conservation and the environment, and to really address the imbalance that's occurred over the last 10 years. And we often hear our first selectman talk about the need in his job to balance different interests. And so we think we're here in large part because of his urging. And so we want to help him with his balancing job. And we've looked at the 2016 POCD, and we see in there it's a real treasure trove of recommendations, conservation, environmental recommendations. And for whatever reason, a lot of them weren't implemented. And we think it's really because of the focus that the town has had on development. And while we think that people really appreciate the additional amenities that development brings, we think they're beginning to see that they're coming at a cost. And our town is increasingly urbanized, and even WestCOG describes us as an urbanized community now. And traditionally, people have moved out of Manhattan. They're looking to come to a very pretty coastal town, and they'll put up with the commute for that reason. But now we're beginning to see something that's sort of a mini Manhattan. And in the process, we've lost a lot of our natural resources. We've lost green space. We've lost a ton of trees. And with that, we've lost a lot of the natural benefits. We've lost shade. We've lost air filtration, water filtration, flood mitigation, and beauty and habitat too. And so we're really at a point where we're reaching capacity, which means we've got more people, more heat, more noise, more pollution. And we think that looking at our natural resources can be a way to really address long-term public health issues. We're going to have more pollution, more heat, more noise. And you've probably seen the 2021 UConn report that shows that Darien's surface temperature has increased more than 10 degrees in the past 20 years. And so 2021 was before all of the major development we've seen now in Roten Heights, Corbin, Thorndale, and before Eversource came to town, and before we had many more new residential properties that have lost trees. And we have the two WestCOG reports that show Darien is really almost the worst of the 18 towns in terms of low tree canopy, the combination of low tree canopy and very high impervious surface. Mm-hmm. And we think that issues like that, pollution and heat, they can't all be addressed by engineering solutions. They're going to have to be addressed by nature-based solutions, if you like. Things like air pollution, and we have severe water pollution. There's a 2025 UConn report now that was published in January that shows a particular pesticide that's a neonicotinoid, imidacloprid, and that has been detected in our own Goodwives River at levels above the EPA acute level, and that signals a severe effect, and that could mean loss of half the aquatic life in that river. And you've probably heard from the Coastal Commission about the other effects of pesticide in coastal waters too.
Fertilizer.
Yeah. And fertilizer is another big problem. We really, we know that the town and residents use a lot of fertilizer, and that ends up getting into our water bodies too. It can cause hypoxia, it can cause fish loss, and we've got 2 ponds in Darien now that need to be dredged as a result of that, the Tilly Pond and Cherry Lawn ponds. And then we really want to look at nature-based solutions in the context of resiliency too. We need to be more proactive rather than reactive. We've got to build that fence on the edge of the cliff and not keep the ambulance parked at the bottom. And nature-based solutions can help with that. They can reduce the risk of the occurrence, and they can reduce the severity of the disaster too. So that's really just the context of the recommendations that we put together that are obviously very summary and require a lot more detail, from us or however you want to do it. But we thought that by giving you those recommendations, we'd have a focal point for the discussion tonight.
Fred, did you see the document that, I'm sorry, I didn't know you
Yes.
did. Okay.
Yes, I did. Yeah, we all had a chance to review the recommendations that you all put together.
Great.
So thank you for that. Maybe that's a good place to start the discussion in terms of sort of going through, and I think we're approaching this largely from a standpoint of listening to you and listening to what your concerns are relative to the plan going forward, and as we go through this planning process and update the plan over the next year, with the anticipation of a potential adoption maybe next summer or next fall. It's really about listening to various groups such as yourselves and taking your input into account in making this 2026 update the best update it can be relative to not only the growth of the town, which is inevitable over time, but the conservation piece too. And how do we improve that and improve upon conservation over time to make Darien a better place. So.
One of the things that we talked about just kind of philosophically with the first selectman is and I do think this is an important point. We tended to, I think, the way I look at it anyway, we've tended to decide we need to do something, we need to do this development, we need to do an infrastructure project. And then we hear about the consequences of that. It's going to be, let's say it's going to be lost trees. And in my mind, I would say we have to look at, let's say, the infrastructure project and say, how can we accomplish this with zero environmental impact? Or if there is going to be impact, how are we going to mitigate it? And all of those decisions are made at the beginning, rather than just, you're driven by the whatever the project is, and are not focused on the environmental considerations at the same time, because they can sometimes dictate changes. So for example, on Nearwater Lane, when there were supposed to be new sidewalks, and we were told all the trees had to come down. But when we walked it and discussed it, we could see that there were ways around. We could re-engineer, we could rejigger the shape, and there were solutions. And where there wasn't a solution, then we talked about how we were going to mitigate with a replacement. So I just think that was so beneficial for us, and I think for the town and for the residents, the neighbours, to see that thought process at the get-go.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that it's sort of two-pronged from my perspective. One is when we're making changes in town, we shouldn't be making the environment worse as a result of those changes. They're either the same or an improvement, which I think is what we should be aiming for, is net positive, is how I like to think about it. And we've had a lot of opportunities in the last 10 years with all this development, and I know that there were changes, improvements made for the stormwater management, but then there was a lot of other things that were ignored and lost in the process, and we need to be thinking more holistically for each project, not just dealing with, I think the town is reactive to particular issues like flooding. Let's deal with flooding. But then it sort of ignores the heat rise when they take down the trees. And there's no holistic view of how to deal with these. These are all climate-driven problems for the most part, or, and also partners with that, increased storm intensity, increased sea level rise. These are all part and parcel of the same issues. And you can't deal with things on a one-off basis and be reactive. You need to be looking at holistically. That's the basis of sustainability and resiliency. How do you get ahead of these problems? And the way to do that is to improve the environment, and also to look at the town holistically before you start approving things. And like, if you look at the tree canopy in town and say, okay, we have the lowest tree canopy, are we going to approve a project where we take down 175 trees? Okay, if we do, I know there's something on the books where the Board of Selectmen said if we take down a tree, we replace it. Well, science says that if you take down one mature oak tree, you need to replace it with between 30 and 350 saplings to have the same environmental value. If you pull out a wetland, under deep you're allowed to replace that if you expand another wetland. But the ecological value will not be restored until 100 or 200 years later from carbon sequestration. So, we have this, we think we can fix stuff by planting one extra tree. We need to be science-driven when we approach these problems. I mean, there's so much information out there right now. Save the Sound, it's got a ton of information on coastal resiliency, all these other organizations from the state level. We're not listening the way we should be listening in this town. And we shouldn't be moving forward or ripping down tree stands or disturbing wetlands until we look at the science and we try to make it better as we do quote unquote improvements.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think to your point, we've tended to rely on engineering as a replacement. Like you mentioned the drainage. Oh, we're sorting the flooding because we've now got this engineering solution. But you could have maybe saved money on the engineering solution by not causing the problem to be exacerbated by removing the natural resources that you had there. Like Julie's saying, if you do it holistically, if you look at what you have as a whole and say how can we combine the existing natural resources with some engineering to improve those services, that to me is win-win.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, and one thing we wrote about, and I think it's very important, at this point, if you are building anything in Darien, you go in front of P&Z or commission, and you have someone who's representing that project. There is no one at this point going in and pointing out the environmental impact, long-term or short-term.
Mm-hmm.
So things get pushed through and approved, and we historically, and we being conservationists, environmentalists in town, have come in after the approval process is so far along that we somehow became the enemy in all of this instead of a partner.
Yeah, because we look like we're obstructing the
Progress.
fait accompli.
Right.
And instead of, if there was a way to incorporate that earlier, we think you would end up with a better product, and you would end up without perhaps delays or aggravation caused by these views coming in at the 11th hour.
Yeah, or opposition. I did have a question for you. We've talked a couple of times about the loss of trees, specifically the loss of tree canopy, and that the effect on surface temperature. I'm curious if you have any reports or data sources on that subject that you can clue us on to.
The 2021 UConn report is Professor Fragamani.
We can also send it to you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can send it to you.
Happy
Yeah,
to.
but just if you can also
Yeah,
find it.
and that one's excellent. And WestCOG is about to come out with, well, we've been
Yeah.
waiting a few months, but a new report on tree canopy in the region. And we're anticipating, we're actually not sure because now we own Great Island. I don't know if we've ever figured out what that will mean, but we've obviously, Eversource alone took down hundreds of trees. So we don't know what that will say, but it is going to be an interesting data point when it comes out.
And just to give you a kind of a real example, and I'm not gunning for anybody here, but if you walk down Corbin Drive now on a summer afternoon, it's almost painful because we've got, obviously the temperature is high, but then the sun's been shining on the building all day, the heat is radiated out. It's almost physically painful. I feel sorry for those businesses there at that time of the year. Apart from all the fact that their products are fading in the windows. There was a time, yes, maybe the buildings weren't as pretty. They were sort of one-story buildings, but they were set back, and there were big oaks in front, and it was definitely shadier. Maybe it wasn't efficient from an economical, commercial perspective, but it was certainly nicer it was certainly more comfortable to walk in. And we have sidewalk sales now that are still planned to go ahead this year, and I think there were very low attendance last year because after 9 o'clock, it's sort of unbearable.
It's too hot.
Yeah, there's other reports. So I live down by the water in Darien, and we are subject to storm surge floods.
Mm.
Sea level has risen 6.5 inches since 1950, but is projected between now and 2050 to rise an inch a year.
Mm.
So, we're going to have regular inundations, and we do. The main road in and out is at extreme high tides is now flooded. It's not just storm surge anymore.
So that you're cut off at that point. aren't you?
Yeah,
With each spring tide?
people lose their cars on a regular basis in the floods, trying to get in and out of the neighborhood. But so there's a lot of information from NOAA and from Save the Sound on the sea level rise issues and how to deal with those, and from a coastal resiliency perspective. And we've had Save the Sound out here walking some of the more vulnerable properties. We've had them walking vulnerable town properties, but it's also house properties and property value. My house is 16 feet high because of FEMA. So but not everybody in the neighborhood is as safe as I am. But I moved 4 houses down because on Christmas Eve 2 years ago or 3 years ago, Long Island Sound was at my front door, and I was like, "This is
which is why I'm
real.
going to Julie's if
it's very real to us who live along the coastline." And the flooding comes from both directions. The water table rises and it comes in from the ocean at the same time. And we're not treating our coastal properties as assets for resiliency. And that's going to cost us in the short term. It's not, the emergency's already sort of arrived. But there's a lot of reports out there on that. There's reports on the watershed. I know you have Bill Cavers in here. He's on Coastal Waters. I served on Coastal Waters for 3 years, and as the chair for part of that time. And there's a lot of reports on the watershed issues. We have 3 major rivers in town, and our drinking water in Darien is hyper-local. It comes from Darien and Stanford. And so what we put into, what comes off the stormwater and runs in, and if it's not filtered properly, we're drinking it. Connecticut has PFAS problems worse than most places in the state. We also we put a lot of road salt down, which is causing salinification, that's a word, along on Sound. But also, I know in New York State at the Croton Reservoir, they just came out with a report there, the road salt is actually making the drinking water in the Croton Reservoir, it will be too salty to drink in a couple decades. And, I don't know if we have that problem here, we need to look into it, but it's all running down into our drinking water sources. And so,
before I forget, sorry, this point, you asked about data points on tree canopy. Jay-Z mentioned to us he has some kind of Google platform on steroids that he can, he can look down at any place in Darien. I think Long Neck Point is a place that's often pointed out because people have just clear cut, but it's happening all over town. It's happened in the Bay where we live, and there's been no consequence, there's an attitude that if you let people do what they want with their property, but then it hurts everyone else.
Yeah, it's externality. It's taxing everyone else because you allow people to do what they want.
So whatever that is that he has a subscription to is going to give you probably real insight into where we've been and where we're going.
And one of the problems I think we have when we looked at the 2006 POCD and the 2016, and when we spoke to the first selectman, is the lack of baseline data that's been created in town.
Absolutely.
And so there's no tracking. And we asked, how can we do a measurement? And if we don't bake that into the next POCD, we're going to be sitting here in 10 years having the same conversation if we don't know what we've lost. We don't know how. If you don't know what you have, how do you protect what you have? So I'm a strong proponent of baseline data tracking, metrics, and check-ins, milestones, whether it's annually or biannually, to make sure, we are actually thinking about what we're doing as we're doing it.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a big maps person. I'm a big GIS person, and so that is the first way that my brain looks to solve a problem, right? Is to figure out exactly what there is and what has changed.
And Norwalk is using their GIS systems. They're so much more proactive than we are. Every time a tree goes in or goes out, or
Right.
It's mapped.
it's
Yeah.
mapped.
Yeah, they've
And
Well, they just
we-
completed a whole tree survey or tree inventory. I think it's about 4,100 trees. I mean, and pretty much citizen-led, which is an amazing accomplishment in itself. So we see in the POCD that it's always we're referred to as 97% developed. I think that was in 2016. So it'd be interesting to know where we stand today, and I would assume that could be something done through GIS.
Absolutely.
So as the Land Trust, we were mentioned, specifically called out as a partner in the 2016 POCD. And I think, I can't really answer for my predecessors, but I know that we would really want to be considered as a partner moving forward and to have that implementation plan in mind, to know, and other partners as well. It's how we accomplish what is being set forth in this plan over time, with check-ins, with accountability, to actually get things done.
Yeah, because to your point, the Land Trust was listed as a partner, yet not really engaged as a partner.
Right.
And much like the Conservation Commission was listed as the body to execute on so many of the things listed in the 2016, and then never came to fruition. And so it actually, if you go back to 2006, it was also listed in there as to the formation of the Conservation Commission. And to my mind, that's 19 years. That's a generation lost of conservation. Like, how do we implement Conservation Commission and a conservation mindset that is real for the town? Like, that's what we've been talking about a lot, is to, I know this is a vision plan, but, I don't want to be sitting here in 10 years and we don't have a Conservation Commission again. So we'd love to hear from you what your thoughts on it.
It's particularly confusing because the 2016 plan actually says that implementation of the action steps is key, and we didn't even have a plan implementation committee, so we
It was shelved as far as we could tell.
It was sort of disabled from the get-go,
But what's interesting is that the 2006 and more so the 2016 is often used by developers to justify whatever it is and to rationalize whatever it is they're building. And some definitions, I think, have been lost in terms of, you use the word green space. And when you go over to Darien Commons, I was told, yes, there's green space, and it's like these little berms and some plants in pots and some maybe grasses. That's not, that's landscaping 101, right? It's not green space. But developers have gone in and said, we're going to have green space.
It doesn't provide a place for people to bring their dogs or
Or
their
public
children.
plaza area.
That's how it was
right?
defined,
So-
more of a public
It's
plaza.
Yeah,
But that's,
there's public plaza versus green space.
Or open
Sometimes-
space.
Sometimes it's combined, sometimes it's, open areas with benches and some plantings and,
right.
other configurations that, make it a pedestrian-friendly area, open to all, versus, just open green space.
Yeah.
But I understand that the Darien Commons area was a zoning exception, or they created new zoning rules and regs to accomplish a greater degree of a footprint for that development. And so open space or green space was sort of
Pushed aside.
reconceived, and it became this plaza with planters. And so, as you were saying, there's no room for, no
It's a
place for
parking
dogs
lot.
but and I think
and
in a
people
way,
to actually enjoy nature.
we have to sort of get rid of these not definition, but the way we use this language, because when I hear public plaza, it sounds like it's really good. It's got a bench, it's got a flower, it has, I don't know, it is walkable, but it's 1,000 degrees. So no one's going to sit on that bench, no one's going to be able to walk. Yesterday I went to Palmer's, I had the dog in the car, and it was so hot. I couldn't shop because there was nowhere to park that had any shade whatsoever. And
that's
that's
been with
what
Darien
we're gonna have
Commons.
to
They
accommodate.
literally, probably they call it a public plaza. It's a piece of asphalt and there's a bench on either side.
And the implication is how many families live, or how many people moved into your?
The units, I'm not
It's going to be
quite
six,
sure.
I just saw Parks and Rec, they said 600 units total.
Yeah, so there was no provision for any place for like children to play. So what they did instead was say, oh, well, we need to go take this nature space we bought and we need to cut every tree down on it and create a lawn so kids can ride their tricycle, and that's at the beach. So because they didn't provide in the development space for the families they were bringing in, something close by, suddenly you have what's left of Darien's natural assets destroyed as a result.
And you have to drive there.
There's a
And you have to
direct
drive there 'cause
impact
Yeah,
when
right.
you don't
Can't walk.
contemplate in the development, the nature for people.
Right.
People, like you said, people move to Darien because they want some nature and some beauty. They don't, I lived in Manhattan for 17 years. I love Manhattan. But I love coming out here and when I go to Darien Commons, I feel like I'm back in Manhattan. There is
Yeah,
nothing
it's
very
so
green
nice.
about it.
I
But
think-
people would move here with kids and they want to have to be outside. And
But
so-
it shouldn't necessarily fall to the town. That could be part of P&Z and the developers, because they are putting in these huge parking areas, they're putting in these huge buildings, they're giving us more stuff to buy.
and making a lot of money
And
doing
heat
it.
and
Making a lot of
cool
money,
and-
right.
Right.
And
Taking down trees.
And diminishing the
And there's no-
environment in Darien at the same time.
It's all impervious, so where does all that water go?
Yeah.
I also think that when, my career prior to becoming an executive director was in the architectural field. And oftentimes we would spend so much time in creating a rendering that spoke to the essence of a project. And so when I see the renderings for some of these developments, it's all full of green, and you've got these beautiful trees and planters, and then
Beautiful mature
either the
trees.
village green or the the
Yeah.
park bench or the whatever. And those are the things that we, as people, treasure, and we want to be in those spaces. But then when you really look at the species of the tree that's been planted in the planter, or the size of it day one, or will it ever be more than just an ornamental 3.5-inch caliper tree, because it won't have the branches, it'll have a verticality to it, or no real substance or substantial contribution from a nature standpoint. So they take, for example, the Heights Crossing. I just was at the intersection before this meeting, and I noticed that as I'm on Hollow Tree coming down, they've just planted the first trees outside of the Goddard School. They happen to be ginkgo. Okay, there's a whole line of ginkgo trees that they've just put in. And that the strips of lawn between the road and the building are probably, they're triangular. They're not even strips. So you've got these little wedges that are now carved out between the asphalt and the cement and then the sheer face of the building. So they've really maximized that footprint to the point where there's no room to add a good-sized tree that's not sitting in a pit or in a planter. It's just,
I didn't even know
Ginkgos.
ginkgo was on the ARB list.
I don't know either, because it is,
I
don't think
ginkgo
it is.
is a non-native tree and serves
Okay,
almost
huge.
no natural habitat or service to our local wildlife population.
Yeah.
So, the state of Connecticut has provided, under statute for municipalities and towns to have a conservation commission. And we've taken a look at the statute, and I have a copy of it here, if someone wants to look at it. This is not the best printout.
I would have gone to Juliet's talk before the, I don't know what group.
Men's
but-
Association.
Oh, did you come to that?
No, I had another meeting at the time.
Oh.
So I couldn't go.
We
to
keep
that.
putting her out there, there will be other talks, and we have another
You gave the
event.
talk was about
May
conservation
14th.
commissions.
Yeah.
I think it was to the Democrats or something.
Oh, that was me.
Oh, no.
Juliet or Julie?
That was
Which one
me.
it? Oh, it was Julie, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah.
that's Julie.
We try to
I
split
just-
up the work. She does better.
Got it, so it was you though. Anyway.
Yeah,
so
I'm happy to
please,
share
yeah.
I can share that talk with you, the write-up I did for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, I mean, a lot of it I'm repeating here tonight, as you can imagine, but, so, the statute does provide for a lot of the things we're talking about, is a watershed plan, a drought plan, other plans. It also provides for, making recommendations to zoning and planning commissions, inland wetlands agency. And the way we think about it is we had a conservation commission, these agencies would sort of be communicating and reporting so that everybody's in the loop. But when I sat on the Advisory Commission of Coastal Waters, we had, we didn't have people come and before they did projects, before P&Z or Park and Rec did a project in the water, they didn't come to the meeting and say, this is what we're doing, what do you guys think?
Right.
I mean, there's no
It's
sort
an
of
advisory.
integration.
It is advisory.
as well.
It's
Yeah.
advisory, yeah, and it has no real teeth at all.
And that's what we've tried to do with this, what we're describing is like Julie said, have involvement at the get-go and have not just the volunteers being told there's a meeting, come along, because we don't have, well, Elizabeth has credibility, but we don't have credibility. This is not our job, we are volunteers. But for the town to sort of embrace and formalise the kind of philosophy that we were talking about in policies and through the creation of a commission, then it takes it to the next level. And when that commission, as Julie says, is charged with working with P&Z, with looking at applications, having approval processes, or whatever the level of involvement is, it's become more serious, and the town is committed in a way that it isn't currently. We don't see it currently committed.
And we're also far behind what a lot of our peer towns are doing, which is
Yes,
really
yeah.
kind of terrifying when you read how proactive and advanced they are. I mean, we are, when we've looked at whether it's Greenwich or Westport,
Norwalk.
even Stamford, Norwalk.
And they've got a lot of grant money because they have
Yeah.
organized, and I mean, that's drying up now, but there's real opportunities there for Darien that were lost because there was no level of organization to look at the problems, write the grant applications, and I think how Norwalk got millions, Stanford got millions,
Crazy
we're
numbers.
Greenwich
and
constantly
it's
was.
an opportunity lost.
You could make a distinction and say, well, Darien isn't Norwalk or Stanford, but we like I said, we're urbanising. We're moving that way.
Yeah.
And I personally have sent grant opportunities to the town, to our town administrator in the past, and they haven't been acted upon. So Julie's exactly right. There hasn't been that willingness. But I think if you look now, you look at this as a public health issue, all sorts of risk issues with resiliency, we have to address it.
And livability.
Yes.
I mean, we want Darien to
Yeah.
be livable into the future.
I think, Julie mentioned something, there's actually a part of a plan for one of our coastal areas, and it's just kind of an encircled area, and there are neighborhoods that abut it, besides the coastline. And it says, but you don't need to worry about flooding if there is a major storm, because there are no residents in that area. No, there are not, but by the way, they're across the street. And the flooding that we already see, going into that area, those people would all be stuck. I mean, so yes, in the area where they're doing this building, there are no residents, but they're a
pretty
stone's
close
throw
by.
away.
Yeah.
So I don't know,
Potentially isolated or restrained by.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any thoughts you want to share with us?
Yeah, I wanted to address one of the first things, Julie, you talked about. Well, I guess I'll just forget the exact words you used, but as a planner, we do this for various towns, and there is nothing sadder than doing all this work and not having implemented to a planner, to my own personal perspective. So, and oftentimes the comprehensive plan or the POCD in whatever town you're in, New York, it's comp plan, here POCD. By nature, it's a function of the planning board or the planning and zoning commission to kind of take charge of it and update.
Yes, yeah.
And so, oftentimes you'll see, the final document and the planning website, the planning department site, which makes sense, but obviously it covers topics beyond just things that the planning board would do. And so, I see a POCD as something that's of interest to any department, any sort of thing. So, obviously I can't control that, but I can at least, recommend that, this, a plan is broadly, advertised. I mean, we met with all these folks, Public Works Department, Parks Department, we met with all these folks because there's sections devoted to each of their, their responsibilities. And so we want to make sure that that's the final plan that they're involved and that the final plan is carried over and communicated to all the departments somehow. But again, that would be my recommendation, ideally, for the town to enact it. That's something they would need to do. I can't control that, of course.
But we did notice, implementation is going to be so key because particularly in Darien, we don't have time to create another document like the 2016 that gets basically shelved to collect dust.
Right.
We have coastlines that we've not done. We're finally building up Pear Tree Point Beach, even though years ago we had the same problems in those. The money, it just kept becoming more and more expensive, and finally Jay-Z said, we're going to lose this beach if we don't do this
right.
now.
It's
so we can't wait for, we now have an opportunity at Great Island, we have Weed Beach, we have some of the clubs are at beaches, homes that are on the water.
Yeah.
There's a lot of inland issues. This can't be something that's simply guidelines.
Right. So the second...
Sorry, I just wanted to add to that because I think that perhaps part of the problem is that it is very fragmented, at least the 2016 one, you've got your leader, you've got your partner, but who actually goes in and says, oh, we've got to go and look at what page blah blah says and do that today. That's why I think some kind of implementation committee that's looking at the whole thing and nudging, reminding, setting deadlines,
Project management.
really overseeing and administering, because I think it's very balkanized as it is. Very difficult for a town to implement when it's so fragmented. But if you had one kind of oversight committee that's watching implementation and letting people know who's done what, then I think it's much easier to see it coming together.
Yeah, I would completely agree that having a committee, that works well. I think the best example I know of, 2015, I worked on with several other people from my private company, the Downtown Westport Master Plan, and there was a planning and implementation committee. So it was focused on downtown, but nonetheless, the planning and implementation committee carried it forward. It's still carrying it forward to this day. Like I said about seeing things implemented. It's great. That's always the one we look to when we see something that's really been going. And since 2015, they've been working at it piece by piece. But so having a committee that's in charge with their task is to kind of look at the plan and I think the second part of that is one thing I communicated to Natalie in my email to her was, I think what would be helpful for the 2016 POCD has a lot of recommendations, but there's no sense of what the priorities are, that sort of thing. And so, that's going to be, it just makes, if you give the Planning and Implementation Committee, 50 strategies, I'm sure some people, based on their opinions, would say, okay, this is the most important, this is the most important. But if it's already kind of embedded in the document, this is really what we agree on as being the highest priority item, that's what we should implement first.
Or even
second.
it's from a staggered perspective, you've got to do certain things first in order to get to the next
That's
stage.
exactly right, too.
Yes.
That's exactly right,
There's
too.
logical steps. But then once you've done that, I think many of the things can be run in parallel. They're not all sequential.
Right, they're not
Setting
necessarily
up
sequential,
two
right.
commissions, and then they've got their work tasks. So I think you have to sort of really drill down to set priorities and then allow things to happen at the same time.
Right.
Otherwise, we'd never get done.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing is when
Yeah.
when you just have a list of recommendations, that some of them are things that have to happen first and some that happen second.
Yes.
So to identify that, gives you some time perspective, like, okay, so this we can do in years 1 to 3, and then this one we can accomplish 3 to 5. So you're not trying to worry about how are we going to do all these things, So that's generally something that we like to put into that added information structure into recommendations also.
I think it's also-
Sorry, one of the things that, when we're recommending conversion of the advisory commission to a full commission or establishing a new commission, we understand that's going to require RTM approval, and that is a whole process. But you could establish an interim board with more or less the responsibilities. I mean, it's not under statute, but that's something that the Board of Selectmen can establish. So it's an advisory board until it becomes a full commission.
Right.
So you haven't got a gap while you're waiting for the RTM. You're really maximising efficiencies and really getting a focus ahead of time and allowing some work to be done, whatever it is possible, can be undertaken.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you just lose time.
And would you say, I mean, that particular, looking at the what you prepared, the recommendations that you had prepared for us, it looks like from what I read here that the some sort of, whether it's an interim board or that you're recommending is sort of a high priority thing, because that makes the other things possible to start looking at potential regulations or whatever you want to do that. So,
and there are certain things. I mean, we haven't. We were desperate to give you something that was short and that was manageable to read. We have got longer stuff.
Yeah. Several drafts. Yeah.
Always make sure we never invite it back. So we want to keep it.
I think that's right. I think from our perspective, at least getting the Conservation Commission or board activated, and having some implementation ability can kickstart a lot of things. I have a laundry list that we put together that's about 10 pages long of all the things we want to do. But the umbrella is really, it's like, think about conservation first and partner amongst all the committees in town and make conservation baked into all the decisions. Mm-hmm. And everything else sort of falls from that. Like, it comes down.
And Jay-Z was very interesting. He said, just the questions we generate from the four of us alone, it's a lot for town hall staff. And so we talked about the Conservation Commission also being a resource for these other boards, because
absolutely, yeah.
It is impossible that everyone on P&Z or Parks and Rec or the Aging Commission understands the environmental consequences of what they're doing. So a Conservation Commission is someplace to go, and
it is I would say it's priority number one that
well,
it gets
before
enacted.
You get into that.
Okay.
I agree with that, but I think there's a parallel number one too.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I think a lot of the suggestions that we have around a tree ordinance, now I understand a tree ordinance will take a long time to pass, but in the past I've suggested to 3 successive administrations that if those administrations, none of them wanted to enact an ordinance to protect trees. So I offered an alternative, which was to adopt policies and to enact processes within planning and zoning or wherever you want to house it. Jamie Stevenson suggested EPC, but that was shortly before she was no longer first selectman. That there are ways that you could mimic the effects so that you don't lose ground. I mean, so when I totally agree with Julie that Conservation Commission is number one, but it doesn't mean there's only one number one. I think there's, we can work with you to explain how we see some of these other activities that could work in parallel. We're suggesting a tree advisory board that could be initially at least part of the conservation board that gets started immediately before there's a full commission, and eventually peel off. There's so many different ways to construct this in a way that is speedy and responsive.
Right, that's interesting. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. The other thing I want to say was. We have, I know there's, I didn't realize that there's well, it's good to know that there's another WestCOG tree study coming out, because I have the 2018 one, which is obviously 2018. But we have collected a lot of reports, so we're trying to get knowledgeable about all the work that's already been done. Maybe not necessarily specifically, or Darien may be included in the work, but it may not. Maybe it's regional, maybe regional nature. So
Yeah,
you
you
know,
have
the
to
UConn
trawl
surface
through them to
stuff.
find the
And,
name.
yeah, there's so much out there.
We'll share.
There's a lot out
So
Yeah.
if there's anything you think, I mean, I have a large, actually what I do is I have a large, well, I'm not gonna say, I have a large file folder organized with all these things, but if you think there's something that's important, I should know. I may have it, but I may not have it.
And I assume you've got the tree inventory that the Great Island consultants have done.
The
Yeah, I have
3,500.
all the gray.
I mean, that's to me is such a
materials.
huge step.
So,
Right.
Yeah, baseline data.
I
Yeah.
had
That's
a
right.
question for you. I mean, one of the things that we will look at with respect to conservation is what in the development regulations already exists as
Yes.
far as conservation through the development process. And so we will, of course, look at that and look at opportunities to enhance that. But I'm curious, because I'm sure you are well aware of how you would modify or how you would enhance those development regulations, those mitigation measures that are already baked in. Do you have suggestions?
Well, we put some of them in here, and I'll be the first to admit that I'm defeated by the planning and zoning regulations. Every time I try and look at them, I just find something else to do because it is overwhelming.
Totally.
And I go through 10 pages, and what I've understood of it, I can't see anything conservation related. So in a way, this wasn't meant to be lazy, but we thought that by including in here what we would like to see, then experts
Right.
could say, we've already got this, we've already got that. Now, we don't feel you do, because otherwise we would see them in the developments that exist, and we don't see any of it, so we've reverse engineered and assumed that the regs need changing.
Right, I mean, the obvious, where's the solar power in some of the, developments that are happening right now?
Yeah.
Where are the green roofs?
the
Where's the
EV
recapture of the
chargers?
gray water, recharging
Yeah.
stations, even the down to the lowly, ARB tree specification?
Yeah.
Or
What are
put-
our street trees
They
looking
put
like?
in a whole new parking lot, well, behind the Corbin District and also at Darien Commons, and they could have, I just came back from Arizona, and there's solar panels
Mhm.
that the cars park under,
Mm.
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
Or
Yep.
you could have planted trees that would have made it less,
Yeah.
changed
Reduce
the
that
whole.
surface temperature.
Yeah, I mean, so again, we don't know all the places that it's lacking, but we just look and we say,
Some of the
oh my
obvious.
God, why didn't you do this? Why
Yeah.
didn't you do this? So it's,
Mhm.
there's a lot. And we did make, like I said, a 10-page list of things we think we should be doing. It's inexhaustive because there's many more things we couldn't even think about, but.
Yeah.
There's always room to make things better, right? No matter
Right.
what you do. And, we could sit down and sort of, review the details of the regulations from, soup to nuts, basically. And, go through everything. Some of the things you mentioned are not in there, but there are many conservation-related items that are inclusive within the zoning regulations that are in fact there, that including coastal area management review. There's a whole section of the zoning regulations on that. Flood mitigation, our department in the town is currently going through the process of updating the drainage manual to require more robust stormwater management and drainage infrastructure in connection with residential and commercial projects throughout town.
And I do think that's one place that I've seen there's been very good infrastructure improvement. Absolutely the new developments the infrastructure's been an improvement over what was there
Right.
before. Though I think it could be expanded to sort of the more, if you look at the water filtration in the residential neighborhoods is a problem. We have land trust property that has 2 massive storm drains that come in, and we've had Craig Flaherty look at it, and there's really no filtration going on. Before that, water literally goes like a fire hose into the Norotan River and then goes into Long Island Sound. So there's absolutely some good stuff in there, and then there could be better. And again, this is the opportunity to look and figure those things out. And we would love to have a chance to sit down and talk through like specifics. We could go through the list, and I don't have the level of knowledge you definitely have on this stuff, and so
Yeah, it'd be interesting to.
yeah, it'd be great to have a meeting. And
Might be a good thing for the 2026 POCD to do is a narrative form, summarize what the regs already accomplish, and identify what we didn't talk about this earlier when we were talking about objectives and goals. But one of the things that I find particularly frustrating in comprehensive plans and POCDs is when they're too broad. When the objective or the goal is so broad that, of course, nobody does anything about it for 10 years. Nobody really knows where to start. And that, I think, could go a long way in making those goals more specific and therefore more achievable, identifying what is being done and prioritizing what could be done.
They have to be actionable steps, and I think a lot of the language in the 2016 had as action steps: consider,
Right.
reinforce,
Right.
think about,
Evaluate.
Yeah,
Study
evaluate.
this.
Yeah.
I mean,
Great.
we're done.
Yeah. It's
I
rather
considered it, and I'm going to go and
yeah.
have a cup of tea.
So I'd also like to look, or at least have some ability to participate in knowing more about projects that are in the pipeline, that are maybe not yet on the board, the drawing board, for instance, like the Norotan Heights parking area, so that they could be approached with more of a green infrastructure mindset. As we were saying, I thought your point, Julie, was just fantastic. If you can approach a construction project and make it, an environmentally positive outcome, not a negative, not a setback, so that it's really being forward-thinking in terms of the environment. And I don't know of other projects that are in the pipeline that would be just, I think, more productive to share.
That's some kind of process where you're involved before the application goes in,
Yes.
so that you're streamlining and making the application process easier, because the developer has looked and realised what he's going to have to come up with, and
Right.
address them.
It's
But we have
cooperative, it's
to-
not, working to redesign something where
Yeah,
you have a loss of,
exactly. Yeah.
project income. I mean,
Yeah.
nobody wants to redesign something.
But I think the 2016 actually had diagrams and gave examples of, for example, parking that was to be avoided and parking that they encouraged. We got the parking that was to be avoided over at Norotan Heights. So even though it was in the POCD, either no one read it, no one cared, or there was no implementation, or it was forgotten about. So we kind of, and I mean, it's, it says avoid, and that's
Right.
exactly what they did.
So I
over
guess the
it.
developer in that case would look at what supports their
Yes.
project and
Right.
not look at what
Yes,
doesn't support
exactly.
it.
Right.
I had one quick thing, maybe it's a question for Fred, but or maybe others, but I know the stormwater management manual for Connecticut, stormwater quality manual was updated in 2024, and I believe that says low impact development is the guiding, is the number one, the first thing that should be happening. And that municipalities have to follow that? Is that-
Yeah, that's right, that's right. Municipalities do have to follow that. And as part of this update that has been occurring throughout 2024 into 2025, a lot of these low-impact development techniques have sort of been woven into this, this new drainage manual that is, in the process of being finalized, and we expect that it'll be adopted sometime within the next few months here.
I did hear a description of that, because I was listening to the, it's your meeting with the Public Works Public Works Committee of the RTM.
Yes, the RTM Public.
And they were talking about some of the changes, which do sound good, but when I think about it, again, it's all focused on engineering, how we do the drainage mechanically, and just thinking about the house that was built down the road from me, that had basically a lumber yard So all the trees that came down were chopped up and they took up the whole front yard.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, oh, that's interesting because there's a house behind and there'll be a lot of drainage issues there.
Right, yeah, yeah.
Wouldn't it be magnificent if the mechanical engineering somehow took into account the fact that there had been trees on that property, and if we had been able to incorporate those trees and whatever services they would provide, maybe they were all half dead, they didn't look it, but you've got viable trees that are performing a function there, and you integrate your engineering with the natural resources. That's really what we're talking about. Don't just get rid of them and say we've got a great drainage manual.
Yeah, and
use it all.
And what we've seen, I mean, what I see all the time is a developer comes in, cuts every tree on the property. They did this on my house, and then they build a house and then they sell it.
Right,
And then
okay.
Darien's left with 20 less mature trees, which, I mean, that just
But
seems.
some great arborvitaes.
It just seems so, it's so.
And good drainage.
It's so short-sighted, and again, it's like, we're just
Right.
degrading
Yeah.
the environment
Yeah.
each time that happens. And, okay, yeah, maybe you need to cut some trees, but do you need to cut every single tree on the property? Yeah, it looks good in the Zillow photo.
Right.
Okay.
I think it's
It's the
interesting too,
aesthetics.
because, I mean, it must be for their own ease as far as design, because
Yes.
mature trees are
Well, they're making the
contribute
houses,
tremendously to
shade.
the, to
they're
the
making
value
the
of the
houses,
property.
Yes.
right,
Yeah.
they're making the houses so much
So
bigger.
large
Bigger,
that
yeah.
they don't have any room left.
Oh.
No, but even
And they
there
like
is
lawn,
still
right?
room,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, they
I
like
think
lawn.
they like, I think it is easy, they can get in and out.
They get their
and-
equipment in and out. They don't
Yes.
have to
Yeah.
modify their design based on
Yep.
the
Right.
uniqueness of the
Yeah.
property.
A big piece of what the Land Trust does, really with our community, is to educate.
Mhm.
And I think that people, after they've become more informed of the value of a mature tree, the value of a native species, it's
get
like the light bulb goes off.
Right, right.
And so we really try to do a lot of that to just raise awareness. But I do think that a lot of the younger population here in Darien is very much vested and interested in the ecological health and welfare of our town, and their kids and their dogs, and so we see it. We see them turning up at our events.
Mhm.
I think the constituents need to be recognized here.
And actually, one of the things that, based on comments from, I think it was Natalie, it might not have been particularly clear, but one of the things that we were trying to articulate in here was to suggest that the town adopt a public information strategy, so that the town figures out how to communicate to residents, exactly to Elizabeth's point, why pesticides are bad, why you should have a soil test before you apply willy-nilly fertilizers on your lawn. And we know that there are some pamphlets outside some of the offices, but that's not public outreach, because people don't walk in here looking for pamphlets.
Mhm.
And there isn't really a single spot on the town website where you can get that kind of information. You have to know what the commissions are, and I think to think about charging every commission, including the new ones that we're suggesting, with we're not making sure, but reaching out to citizens, whether it's periodic presentations, whether it's getting guest speakers, whether it's social media, it should be all of that, to inform the residents and teach them you don't want to be doing this stuff, even if there's no ordinance, but just.
Jay-Z specifically said, as part of the
Educate.
State of the Town address,
Yeah.
he's about the education, he's
Yeah.
not about the enforcement.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
if we aren't going to have an ordinance, or if that's more of a challenge, then just raise the awareness and see,
And we
show
can't-
impact of
We, the
how.
volunteers, can't.
And
Right.
I actually think the opposite is happening, having sat on one of the commissions, is the commissions are afraid to partner at the meeting, at talks, because they're like, well, we don't know what the town's like,
Understand.
blowback, or maybe we should,
Yes.
because,
This is why the policy articulation is so important.
yeah,
Right.
so it's, they're
Yeah,
skittish about it.
Well, and we've also we don't have local media. Our Darien News is gone. The Darien Times has gone statewide and more lighthearted. They reprint press releases now.
Yeah.
Connecticut Observer just pulled their reporter from Darien.
So, you know,
You
the patch
do you subscribe
periodically.
to Darien Magazine, CT? That's a good local resource.
CT Post, Darien Times, I have all the other ones for
No,
but
we'll get you on the
the
subscription for.
Darienite is more like obituaries.
No, this is Darien Magazine, CT, local stories told by a local reporter, it's all local. Darien Magazine,
Is it just
CT.
once a month?
Which, by the way, the
Yeah,
It's just
cemetery in
once
town may
a
be
month
the
or
largest
season, but
open space in town.
it's something
Which
of
one
a
was it?
Cemetery.
voice.
The cemetery, they ought to know.
You should plant more trees over there.
Yeah, I mean, ironically,
Oh,
Jay-Z does a newsletter, and I don't
Right,
know
he
how
has a
many
selectmen's
people read
newsletter
it,
over
right?
email,
But
right?
if,
Yeah.
you know, that's as much a news source, which it's not. It's a first select
We write some.
newsletter. Yeah, we write some, I mean,
Yeah.
We
so
write the
it's
conservation
very
newsletter.
hard reaching the different constituency and
Yeah.
and neighborhoods, right? People, as we all know, people really care about kind of their
Local,
street,
hyper-local.
right? So trying to,
And people are busy, you know, people are
Right.
raising
Yeah.
their kids, they're going to work, and they're,
Yeah, I mean, you can do a lot of work to try to do that outreach and not get their attention, and so I think
it has to be a very
it'll be,
robust.
it'll be something to
communication.
consider in the
Yeah.
POCD is what would be the most effective ways
Right.
in order to.
yeah, Westport may have given some, I mean, I know they're really forward thinking, and I have looked at their POCD, but I don't remember that particular issue, but maybe there's something helpful in theirs. They're very good at.
Well, I also
reaching out.
think we're also, if there's, the environment 20 years ago when I moved here was really fringe. I mean, now people do care. And when we put out our emails, I'm always shocked that we're getting 80% open rate. And, you know, I was with a 9-year-old neighbor and we saw Elizabeth and he's like, I know who she is. And, you know, I went to one of her, like, people,
Celebrity.
yeah, people
Yeah.
are paying attention now.
I mean, I'm aware of a lot of the things that through Instagram of like, you know, Elizabeth, you're talking about kids. I see the Nature Center Instagram posts with the kids there, and I see, you know, some lawn fertilizer.
Yes,
seminar
we've got
coming up
an
next
event
week,
on
and-
May.
So yeah, no, I recognize that all, and like how much work you're doing for that. Again, the Beyond, the movie, the Beyond
Zero.
Beyond Zero,
programs are
yeah.
going to go to. I had a planning meeting that day,
Yeah. But we
I hope
had
to. I
really
certainly
good
will.
attendance. I mean, we
Yeah.
do spend a lot of time marketing these things because we want people
Right.
to come. We had good attendance, and that was helpful for me because it formed the basis of my talk to the Men's Association.
Right.
And we did my talk last year on trees, and
That was
somebody
sold
came
out, I
up
mean,
and-
it was huge.
yeah, it was you know full, and somebody came up to me afterwards and said, I look at trees differently now.
Mm.
And so, I mean, Josie's right. It's about education, but it can't only be education. It's
No.
supplemental to everything
That's right.
else.
Yeah, and I said to him that we had lunch with him not too long ago, and I was sort of hammering away on this point, and he's like, well, you should do something, and I was like, you should do something. You've got the microphone, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah,
It
we
has
can
to, you know,
only-
he's the one,
Yeah.
the town has to lead
Right.
on conservation.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's what this is about. This would show a direction that would, I think, be very empowering.
I mean, I see all of you obviously leading, and yeah, I see that. And so really, essentially, when you say public information strategy, it's, you know, it's not just for yourselves, but how can the town strategy support?
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
has to
how
do
can they
that.
amplify what we
What we're already
just on
saying.
our own are
Right.
trying to do without that support?
I mean, it really is very, very, and I don't know how our committees keep up with and commissions keep up with the amount of work they have
Yeah.
and the amount
That's a
of
lot.
content they need to read each week. But if we did have a conservation commission that could be part of these conversations, I just think, I think today Darien would look very differently, and hopefully, 10 years down from here, it'll look very differently.
Yeah,
because
and
we're
they
just-
want the support. I know I've spoken to people on EPC, and I've been on Coastal, and, I mean, not everybody wants the support, but there's plenty of people who were like, yes, send me more information, let me
Yes.
know, let's,
Yeah, they just don't, I don't think we've ever had anyone say, oh, we don't want clean water or clean air or more green
Exactly.
space.
And I think to have that expertise within the town it could be transformative, because we maybe there's spots of it throughout town, but it hasn't coalesced. There's not a body that's charged with this and that has the expertise to help the rest of the you know, the staff, the town and the commissions.
The Sustainable Connecticut participation, there is participation, I understand.
Yes, we had silver status.
Is that a
We're
framework?
going to be
Is that
downgraded, is
yeah.
what I've heard,
Oh,
to
really?
bronze,
Okay.
probably
Bronze,
because
right.
they did not form the sustainability committee in time.
I see.
Oh, so they
They
had
took
public
9
input.
months, and so they're
Mm.
behind.
There was a delay in getting that committee back up.
Is that a framework that you kind of think is useful for Darien, or does kind of Darien have?
You know, I think it would be useful if you had the rest of the infrastructure in place, but as a substitute for what we're proposing,
It's not
Yeah,
enough.
no,
I don't think
it's
so.
very-
I think it worries me to think that we have silver status when we don't have this in place, because we're looking at
Yeah.
the pollinator gardens, or we're looking at the solar panels on the Public Works Department building.
I kind of look at it as a B Corp certification, which a lot of companies love, but when you
I
dig
see.
in,
That's interesting.
it's
Look at it.
greenwashing.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, they talk, like, I do the lead up to water quality testing in partnership with Save the Sound for the town, and it's about ecological health, not bacteria. And that was one of the things listed, and I'm like, and that was sort of, oh, you're doing a great job. It's like, well, no, we're just doing the testing. We're not actually doing anything
it's
to like improve the
Oh,
water
yeah.
quality.
Got it.
yeah.
We're doing the baseline.
I thought
We're
you were gonna say we're just doing the testing. We're not testing well.
Right.
We're not-
But it's like, if you don't actually start taking
Impact,
steps
yes.
to
Yes.
really make the change, well, who cares if you do this?
Yeah, if you have the data and you're not doing anything with it,
Yeah.
then all you have is data.
That's why I
And
think-
frustration.
Yeah, that's why I personally, I think the data that we have on the water quality in Connecticut generally, I mean, the chemicals are found all over in our waters in Connecticut, but the fact that we have this significant presence of neonics in the Goodwives River should send a really, really strong signal.
It's there definitely is a disconnect. I was reading the bid contract for over at Weed, and the town has in it a kind of fertilizer mix that the contractor, whoever wins it, has to use. So I Googled it, as one does, and it's not to be used by the water. And yet the town said this was the one, which is different actually than what they're using over at Great Island. But the one on Weed, they said you have to use this one, and you're not only not supposed to use it by the water, they say if it gets on a road or off of your driveway, or like, you don't want it to touch anything else, and you have to do soil testing, and it's so.
Again, a lack of expertise
Yes.
and science-driven information, making policy based on science.
Right.
And not making policy based on what we did in 1950.
Mm.
We
And
need
also,
to
I
be
think-
forward-looking.
Yeah, and also leading by example, because I'm not ranking on Public Works, but there's, I think the pamphlets are outside Public Works office that suggest that residents should not use pesticides or should limit their pesticide use and do native plantings. And meanwhile, the town uses them on the kids' playing fields, you know, for treatment of invasives. And that's just not there's such a disconnect. How can you tell the residents to do one thing and not do it yourself? And other we listed them here. There are other towns who've restricted that use on their own properties.
Yeah, I mean, we'd love to see the town be sort of using best practices,
Mm.
again, leading. And it also just there's so many resources. There's like the Save the Sound, and there's so many organizations and the Land Trust that have the information, but no one reaches out
comes to
because
us.
they have their fiefdom. And again, there has to be integration, and I think the Conservation Commission
And would be
could be that
huge. Yeah.
this
Yes.
repository, and they
The
would be
liaison.
yeah, the
And it would
liaison.
also help
Yeah.
with the workload. I mean, why this bid contract had that, I mean, that would have been a straightforward question to the Conservation Commission. You know,
Yeah.
this is what we're recommending, what do you think? And, we would have come back
Yeah, they
and
would have
said,
caught it
Yeah.
before it has gone out to bid how many times?
There's a
At least
5
three.
Mile River Commission. What I'm understanding was it's supposed to be something that's joint with Norwalk.
Yeah,
It
it has a
should be.
special, it's a special grant under statute for that particular river. And I forget the exact reason why, but, so they manage it jointly with Norwalk, yeah.
Okay, so I was curious because it's something that was on the back of my mind. I wanted to ask you.
Yeah. We don't have a harbor management plan.
Right.
Yeah, in Darien. It was tried, I think, back in the 80s or the 90s, and there was a misunderstanding, well, there are different views, but it was shot down. Greenwich has a harbor management plan, and this is off topic, but Deep is seems to be punishing Darien for not having a harbor management plan. And so when I was on Coastal, they were just greenlighting a lot of things like massive piers, docks off of properties, because like, well, if you had a harbor management plan,
Right.
and so they were trying to sort of force us into one, but Greenwich had one and tried to fight a dock just a couple of years ago, and the Connecticut Supreme Court said the harbor management plan didn't matter.
Oh,
So now the
interesting.
guy who writes the harbor management plan is like, I don't think they're worth anything.
Yeah.
So now, like, yeah, so that's an aside on
Is that
our harbor.
Jeff or somebody? I think he does all of them.
I forget, yeah, that guy.
So I'm just looking at the clock, and I'm wondering, because there's, as you can see, this was very broad, but we would love to have the opportunity to get into some of those. Somebody said 10, somebody said 25. I'm guessing total we may have a little more than that. Because we really have flushed out a lot of the details, and would really appreciate the chance to kind of, we've all read the 2016, I think everybody else has read the 2006, I have not. But would that be possible?
I mean, can we suggest that you send us those, detailed recommendations, and, we can review them at Neil, and, Hardesty and Hanover, Malcolm can review those recommendations. We can review them as recommendations, and then come back to you possibly with additional questions. There's also going to be opportunities for you to participate in other, public forums as we move forward with the development of the plan, in terms of public meetings and
Yeah, but
and
this is much
reviews,
more granular
reviews
than
of the
all
drafts. We just have some limitation in terms of meeting with groups and, boards and commissions, RTM committees, multiple times, really.
Jay-Z seemed to think there'd be some flexibility because of the
We could talk to
the
you about it.
depth of what we're offering.
Yeah, I would love to, if you guys have questions or feedback that we can build upon, after you
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
process
Yeah.
what we dumped on you tonight.
Well, we have the next thing, the actual product which we're working on right now is the survey results. So when that's ready to be shared, probably after the next planning and zoning commission meeting, so probably after March 15th. Sorry, May 15th or so is probably we're going to post that for everybody to look
So
at.
is that posted unfiltered? It's just all of the survey information, and curious to know how is it selected, or is it just all of the survey information that is collected and just posted?
Oh, no. It's going
Graphed
to be
and charted
it's going to
and-
be a nice summary report that walks the reader through the summary results. So we don't just we don't leave things like
No raw data.
where it's important to say to provide some language about certain things. We include that. So it'll be like a guided presentation / report that you can click through. So it'll be easy. We won't be sending you just tables. That won't be the case.
And then you're anticipating a public forum, you mentioned?
Yeah, so that we're going to have a public workshop. We'd like to use the results as a basis for what we do in the workshop, probably some sort of prioritization kind of type aim during that workshop. Confirming what, granted is we have 8% of the population, adult population that responded, so it's about 1,200 responses, which was good in terms of the body of information we got was what we needed to just, get a sense of where things are, and then we want to take out the public workshop, confirm it, start to prioritize things out of it, because right now, otherwise it's going to be, right now it'll end up being just a whole bunch of different opinions and stuff, and we want to start getting to that.
One thing, when I was on charter revision back in 2005, as opposed to, we met with every committee at town hall, but we also went out and made ourselves available to the Men's Association, to the League of Women Voters, to Garden Club, anybody who had, and we went to them. Because what we've certainly found, it is very hard. We got a number of emails and calls about, what do I do with this survey? What's the POCD, right?
Yeah.
People still, but once you go out and you can answer questions and engage with them, I think it helps people be more informed when they're answering these surveys rather than, making stuff up or guessing or think they understand it and they don't.
Right.
Yeah, we have a budget we're working under, so we wanted to meet with, at a minimum, all the committees and commissions that were relevant to the POCD. You from the beginning have been interested, so certainly that's the greatest thing when a group comes to me. It's very rare this has happened where a group comes to me first. So you, to your credit, you came to me first. And so, because I do, there are a couple other organizations that I met with individually, the Chamber of Commerce I met with, and I'm looking at, on my list, there's one or two other ones. The Darien, what is it, the DCA, the Darien Community Association. And if there's any, if there is one, that you recommend, let me know, and then we'll consider, reaching out to them. But there's so much in Darien, and we have to kind of put some
So
limits
I think
it.
on that note, I'm here representing part of the conservation voice, but the Land Trust would certainly want to be an organization that you would come, that you could meet with individually. That would be great.
Okay. That's something that.
And we didn't really drill down into any of our recommendations when we talk very big picture. If you have questions as you read it, you can call any of us, and we can explain in more detail whatever you need to.
Maybe what would be most helpful, and the reason I'm pushing back a little bit another meeting is because when we did start to write, we started rewriting the 2026 POCD, and
right.
We don't have your
draft for
expertise,
you.
right?
I'm sorry, you were.
And it was a lot. So if there's one area, maybe it's the commissions that we talked about, or how that would work, or the plans. Maybe it's, the land, natural resources. Maybe it's coastal. But do let us know, because that would help us focus as well. Because otherwise, you're going to end up with.
Yeah, and if you find that you. I can't imagine, but you get a visceral negative reaction to anything that we've written. We are very constructive thinkers, and we can think about workarounds. We can think of adaptations. We don't want to lose an opportunity to have some change here.
Yeah.
And so we more than happy to brainstorm and figure out something that is an improvement over what we have.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is, what you've provided us already is, essentially it's your recommendations, but it's farther than we've taken any other subject right now, because we have your knowledge and your experience with this topic. So, our process, like I said, is going to be the first thing is finish the survey results, public workshop, which probably is going to happen in September. Because the only time we could have it is the beginning of June, and I don't think we have time to prepare that much. So I think September, and then immediately, so the part when we start to really get into your recommendations will probably happen in the fall, when we start looking at all the recommendations together. So that's when we'll probably be sitting there and be like, what was Julia talking about? And that sort of thing.
From our perspective, I think the public information sessions are, they're interesting as residents perhaps, but with, from our conservation perspective, they're far less useful because people aren't as focused as narrowly focused as we are.
Right.
So we'll just, we'll be rolling our eyes or whatever we'll be doing. It's just hearing something that's very, very broad, and we'll say, we want to get to the business. So I'm not sure that being that will advance any of this necessarily, but we understand that you've got to assemble everything.
To Neil's point, though, I mean, we have this discussion. We have what you've sent us already. If you have another document with more detail that you'd like to show
Be careful
us,
what you wish.
Yeah, well,
we love this. So please feel free to send it to us. But as far as a secondary meeting, I think that it would be far more useful when we are drafting these chapters,
yes.
Or when we have a draft of these chapters to discuss with you and to talk about those details.
Yeah.
And also when you've had more time to flesh it out with
Yes,
other
with the
departments.
P&Z,
And the commission,
with
yeah.
absolutely. With
And
German.
Fred, would you mind if we asked you some questions on the regulatory side about some of the things the town already does? So we
Yeah,
have a better
absolutely.
understanding?
Absolutely.
Great, thank
Maybe
you.
you'll,
Sure.
that would be fascinating.
Yeah.
That's where I think we're missing.
Happy to do that.
a lot.
Because, Jeremy had sent us, was that you were linked to the International Green Code, and so we looked at the International Green Code and it seemed to have all the good stuff in it, but again, we couldn't see how it had been adopted by Darien because it wasn't showing up in the buildings, so we were having trouble figuring out which part of the code had been adopted, so it might be quite a long session to explain to us.
So next steps, we do have sort of a working document, and now that we have a little bit more time, we'll go back to that and think about it, and we'll give you that, and we'll also follow up with the reports that we have or can find that we think to be helpful to you, and I may try to read the P&Z regulations.
I look forward to your summary.
Well, yeah. I was never a regulatory lawyer.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult just to start at the beginning, read straight through. That's really not the best way to approach it. So, I can, perhaps suggest some
key sections.
Maybe we'll
some-
send you our questions.
some
that we
ways
have.
to,
Yeah.
better understand
Okay.
what exactly is there, and to
Even-
better
even as-
understand those conservation topics.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
that'd be great.
Even as somebody who works with planning boards and P&Zs, when I have to switch from one municipality to another, it's a wild headache because everybody's code is written differently.
It's pretty arcane,
and,
right?
and it's been put together over the course of such a long time that
It doesn't flow.
it doesn't follow the same
Hard to
format
find the
as
thread.
the town next door. It's
Yeah, we rewrote the harbor ordinances, and I mean, the stuff that was in there, just like, I think it was 100 years old. And then we'll follow up with you, and we look forward to having any interaction and being part of the drafting process. And be careful what you wish for. I will serve you up the chapter on conservation.
we'd love to see it.
Well, like you said, I mean, this has been something that's been in the POCD, this subject, since the previous, not even the 2016, but the
2006, yeah.
POCD. So,
And we've talked to Jay-Z about it. He's very, well, I was going to say he's very supportive about the idea. He did mention it in the state of the town address that he was going to look at this this year.
Here it is.
So that's good.
Have you, so out of the other towns that you've worked on their POCDs, besides the downtown Westport, which sounds like that was pretty specific.
that was a specific plan, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Have there been any POCDs that you think we should read to get a sense of how you put things together, or how you think about things, or are they all vastly different?
No, I mean, they're different depending on what their priorities are. The last one was West Haven, Connecticut, another coastal town. That was 2017, I believe. The focus of that one was economic development. And it's almost 10 years and it's finally starting to happen, the economic development that they're looking for. So it's taken a while. But yeah, another town that I've been in touch with their planner who retired. and lives there still and actually, we're going to be doing their next one as well, because, so I'm excited to critique our own work. This is before Malcolm, so I'll be doing my own work. But yeah, West Haven's, it's a very different, needs and things that got going on there, so.
Yeah, we're really a community in transition here, because it's.
Have you been given overarching priorities for our POCD? I mean, direction? Or are you coming to that?
I think that comes, a big part of that will come from the survey and from the public forum. I mean, we've had conversations with the P&Z, but generally, as far as priorities go, you look to the public, you look to what's being expressed.
And, I mean, in the original RFP, it was stated that, this to be an update of the 2016, and that, many of the goals are still valid. So, I mean, you could look to the RFP if you wanted to see exactly what the
When did you, do you remember, when did you get hired by the town, just so I know where to go back?
I think we got hired in December. I think we signed the contract in December and we started January.
I have
this year.
I
Yeah.
have the error.
But yeah, the original RFP would be the whole.
July of 24. This is the RFP.
Yeah, I was going to say August, but July.
Yeah, good point. I'll go back and take a look.
Yeah, because I can only remember something. I only remember the gist of it, so.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yes.
Yes,
Appreciate
it's
it.
really, really
Nice to meet you.
helpful.
Yeah, this was.
Yeah.
901. I'm so sorry.
No, I'm just, because I don't know how you all work your way around P&Z and it's a lot of meetings, right? A lot of
Yeah.
meetings, a lot of documents.